As you seek to explore your relationship with this information, with this project, I wanted to outline a few distinctions that I find useful as I find my relationship with all of the sensations, all of the research, all of the things that have occurred. The cycle of life has three stages: the child, the adolescent, the adult. In the dialectic, this correlates to sympathy, antipathy, and synthesis. And in an abuse cycle, it correlates to the victim, which I think everyone would agree that a 6-year-old child, being sexually abused, etc., is absolutely a victim, to the perpetrator, which is the antithesis of the victim, to the possibility of breaking the pattern in the domain of the adult. Now, the sympathy of the child is the state when we enter any new relationship with a group, with a romantic partner, with our parents. It's an unknown. And in a healthy framework, that unknown is entered with innocence and with trust. This leads to openness and an ingestion of the status quo, the current norms. As we explore reality through this, we receive the benefit, the blessing, and the curse of the existing system. Now, every system that a human being can create is imperfect. It's analogous to the dynamic of the sphere and the brain, because a sphere is an infinite number of dots, an infinite number of planes and lines. But that's too complicated to relate to. And so through language, through designation, through role, what we do is we break up the spherical ecology of the whole into a framework of words, of roles, of meanings. And due to the simplicity of the brain, this is always a simple framework. It's the equivalent of imposing a triangle onto the sphere, which we just did. The maturation process is a circle, but we can relate to sympathy, antipathy, synthesis. These are points on the journey of that circle, and so we use this not because it's true in its simplicity, but because it is truer than being unconscious. And the sphere is so complex that we cannot hold its complexity in language. So it's unconscious until we reduce it into words and into systems. Now, the blessing of the childlike state is we go into the unknown. We go into the unknown, and in a healthy evolutionary framework, the system, our parents, the cult, the English language, etc., is better than nothing. A good system is better than nothing. And it's hopefully somewhat symmetrical. If we have a complex system reduced down to a simple system that's largely one-sided, one of the fallouts of chauvinism, then it gets to be very imbalanced. And the problem with imbalance is the asymmetry. The problem with asymmetry is all things are in motion, and so we lose grace. The most graceful shape is the sphere. It is the most efficient and elegant construct for transporting, transmuting, transforming energy. And that's what life is. It's a journey on the continuum of intelligence, moving towards grace. Because the most intelligent person on the planet is the person who gracefully consumes the least amount of energy to generate the most amount of sustainable well-being. And here you start to see the intelligence behind the presence of certain monks, certain people that they do almost nothing, and yet well-being, grace, flow. I was fortunate enough to spend a lot of time with such a woman, and every room she entered, people calmed down, people opened up more. The energy lifted just with her presence. It's a high state of intelligence, and in a chauvinistic cult such as our own, we elevate the rational brain. She was not rational, to a high state, even if that brain is used to develop nuclear weapons or all kinds of things. It's a blind spot because we have a high degree of masculine literacy, the mental brain, and almost no relational and emotional literacy, more of the right brain, the feminine side. Now, in order for life to mature, it has to move. You have to start with the existing system. If a child comes in and doesn't learn English, doesn't learn the norms of its cult, they're not into the system enough to start changing the system. But every system is flawed, and many of our human systems on the planet today are very low on the intelligence continuum. As Americans, we will consume more energy per capita than any cult in human history in order to generate more misery per person and around the world than many cults in human history. 70% of Americans are moderately to incredibly unhappy, whether it's loneliness, depression, anxiety, addiction, isolation, trauma cycles. We've got the energy bit down. We're consuming vast amounts of time, money, and natural resources. But the yield on that is relatively low. But you can't change a system until you're a part of it, which is where we come to the antithesis, the state of adolescence, which is the rebellion. That's when, because the child goes along with, basically forms a survival contract with leadership, be that parents, be that the high facilitators, be that the government. You tell me what I need to do to fit in here and be accepted, and I'll do those things, and you let me be part of the system. You let me be part of the group. Because the mathematics of belonging and partnering and synergy are such that an infant has a vastly better odds of survival in a group, with the support of that group, than just sticking a 2-year-old on a desert island without integration, without language. Same with a group. You move into a new town, if you're just completely alone and isolated, your odds of survival are way lower than if you join something. Now, everything you join is flawed. Now, the adolescence is the beginning of giving back to your group. Although in shame-based cults, it's not perceived that way. Because shame is the idea that, we're talking about toxic shame here. Shame is the idea not that this, and this is a mistake, meaning it's flawed, it could be improved. Shame is the idea that I'm so identified with what I do, what I say, what I think, what I feel. I'm so identified with what I do that if there is a mistake in what I do, I am a mistake. Now, a shame-based cult leads to a defense against perceived mistakes. We're also talking about the difference between the reptilian brain, the rational brain, the empathic brain, and the transcendent brain, with the limbic kind of instinctive emotional brain, right above the reptilian brain. The reptilian brain is incapable of love, incapable of forgiveness, incapable of empathy. It's not its job. Its job is to survive. It's an operating system of lizards that other brain systems are on top of. Its job is to attack what is weak. There's a fight, flight, freeze. You fight what is smaller than you. You run from what is bigger than you. And you freeze when both of those options are not easily available. Because it's a landscape of fear. And empathy is impossible for the reptilian brain. The more traumatized an individual, the more active their reptilian brain. The more active their reptilian brain, the less empathic they are capable of being. But in a non-shame-based paradigm, the adolescent is the state of rebellion and of the critic. Now, this is bringing life to the system, because the system, whatever it is, the English language, the monetary system, the political system, the framework at high, the national defense system, whatever the system is, the educational system, it's flawed. And with chauvinism, it tends to be quite imbalanced and flawed. So you've got two flaws. The critic is the breaking away, the differentiation, because the child merges with. The people around it speak English, the child speaks English. The people around it take off all their clothes and look and make eye contact. The child takes off their clothes and makes eye contact. The child merges with the system, with the relationship. Now, it's important to understand, of course, that the child, the adolescent, and the adult have very little to do with our chronological age in a traumatized cult. Because when trauma is induced in infancy and adolescent and in grown-uphood at various points, when it is induced, there's always a split-off, there's a dissociation. And the dissociated part, this is the fuse that blows, because trauma is always an overwhelm of some kind. There's a mass of energy, in childhood it might be incest. There's this giant energy coming towards us. It's too big for us to digest in our body. And so to protect the psyche, we split off. And the part that splits off stops developing because it's no longer integrated with the system. Now, in an electrical system, they teach you how to turn the breakers back on. You blew a fuse. Rather than burn the house down, the breakers switched. You dissociated. Good job. But in a competent cult, the trauma is repaired. And once the energy has been diffused and digested and it is safe, in the electrical analogy, once you've stopped shorting and plugging too many devices into one outlet. You correct the problem first, and then you go back and switch the breakers on so that you have power, so that you have energy flow in all your systems. Now, we're very good in our cult at overwhelming and tripping the breakers one after another, and dissociating parts of ourselves which stay in what's referred to as a regressed state. But it's really the state they're in at the point of dissociation. So they don't develop because they're not as other parts of the psyche develop, because they haven't been tripped fully. If every breaker blows, you're dead. But, parts of the brain that can still function, parts of the psyche that can still be there, certain ages that are still online that haven't been traumatized at that particular time, they continue navigating and growing as parts get frozen. And they don't come back unless you have a trauma-literate cult. And we are a trauma-illiterate cult. So we have 15-year-olds inside of us that have no idea we're not 15 anymore. We have terrified 6-year-olds inside of us that have no idea that the terror is over, because no one brought that part back into the body. And so we can look at a grown-up, but whether they're relating to reality from one of their dissociated parts, because you can think of how big the chunk is by the size of the trauma. It could be 60% of you had to go offline. And there's a certain void after that, and you're not quite yourself afterwards, but you build up and you continue to grow. But you've got a big mass of energy that's dissociated. And because it's dissociated, it's not influenced. When you blow a breaker, you disconnect it from the self and the self from it. You can't integrate and teach these parts until they're back in the system. The critic, the rebel, the adolescent's job is to differentiate with the system, because if you look at the path of evolution over the billions of years, nature's game is winning. If you want to have a winning game, just look at nature. And what nature does is it throws out thousands upon thousands of possibilities. And some of those possibilities do really well in the environment, in the ecology in which they land. And others of them die. In fact, the vast amount of nature in its endless mutations just stop existing because they weren't a good fit for the environment. But nature doesn't care, because when you throw out just about every possibility imaginable, there's always one or two things, if not millions, of complex patterns that do relate to the ecology and the environment around. So nature's always a winner. An individual pattern, an individual ego, an individual species may or may not be a winner. But nature's got it covered, because there's lots of other patterns, there's lots of other egos, etc., that find a nook in the environment and begin to collaborate. And nature's process, this maturation process, sympathy, antipathy, synthesis, is the evolutionary cycle. Blend with what is, then you have to differentiate. Because if you don't differentiate, there's no individuality, there's no uniqueness, there's no mutations. And so there's no new patterns to go out in the ecology and see which one wins and why, and learn from that. And of course, the mutations that fit that ecology the best will be the next stage of development in consciousness and in a species and an ecology. So nature needs unique people. The more diversity of people, the more guaranteed the human species is to survive. It's just a mathematical reality. So diversity is nature's agenda. And to become distinct, you have to go through a rebellion. You've got to go into antithesis. Otherwise, you're a child. You do what you're told. The government said to do this, and you just do it, and you don't think, and you're homogeneous. But that's a problem if you realize you're part of a cult. And in fact, you're part of more than 10,000 cults, 10,000 languages in human history. And 99% of them are all dead. So, we're at about 600 cults at the moment in terms of 600 languages, 600 paradigms, 600 somewhat active cults around the world. And the culture, there's an element in every cult that is intelligence-based, meaning you can see why this cult says this and does this based on the efficiency of that protocol converting energy into sustainable well-being. And then there's the cult aspect of the culture, which is, why is this cult spending 80% of its energy to destroy itself? Well, it's not about intelligence, it's about tradition. It's self-referential, because cults are always trying to maintain their own identity and turn it into a rigid shape. And the more traumatized a cult is, the more frightened it is of foreigners, of outside influences, because all of them change. And a traumatized cult is frightened of change. So most cults have died out. If there's 10,000 cults in human history and we're one of them, what are the odds that we're the one, the right one? Well, it's about 1 in 10,000. So cults are dying out all the time. If people are to survive, they need to mutate and change with the inner and outer environment, which is always in a process of, it's becoming more complex and it's becoming more intelligent, or it's dying out. So you've got to become an adolescent before you have a chance to offer uniqueness to nature's library. And that means going into critic. Now, what do you criticize? You criticize the system that you intimately understand all of its flaws. If you never join the system, you don't know its flaws. But if you're an American, hopefully, as you move into adolescence, hopefully, you know everything that's fucked up about America. Because you've felt it. Your body has told you the inefficiencies. You've been living in an ineffective cult that had rough edges here and brutality here and sociopathic trends there. So you know it. Your body gives you the truth. Your mind, your heart gives you the truth. Now you go into adolescence and you rebel, you criticize. And it's an extreme state. Just like the child is an extreme this, the adolescent is extreme. It's all fucked up. I hate my parents, my government's corrupt, fucking politicians. Nobody understands me. You throw it all out, but you do so clarifying what you don't like, what you're not going to be. And this is a necessary state on the road to synthesis. What is synthesis? Synthesis is the color, the uniqueness that emerges out of the black and the white. I accept everything, I reject everything. I accept it for these reasons, I reject it for these reasons. And then the adult starts weaving a tapestry. My mom made a good apple pie. She was the shittiest listener I ever met. And because I actually needed to be listened to, she's, the most evil listener. So you form then a synthesis. And that's how evolution occurs. And if you trust nature and you trust the body, then you can trust that what you reject in your cult, in your family, in yourself, in the language, in the economic system, whatever it is, that's what needs to be refined. because the adolescent amplifies and magnifies everything wrong, starting with their parents, because they're at the effect. And this is the gift of the adolescent to the system. If you're dealing with adults, if you're dealing with shame-based, regressed children and adolescents, then they can't admit they did anything wrong, because if they did, then they are wrong. And if they are wrong in a sociopathic paradigm, they deserve to be punished. Well, we're a highly traumatized cult, so we're highly reptilian. So there's very much an eye for an eye software running in a lot of our bodies. To the degree that we've been traumatized is the degree that that software predominates, the eye for the eye. That's the reptile. But there are also parts of, if for those of us that have not been completely traumatized, or for where some repair occurred, then the reptilian brain releases the consciousness to move up limbic, become rational. Now you can have rational reptiles. They're incredibly effective sociopaths because all the pattern organizing is there, but you're in a fight, flight, freeze paradigm where you prey on what's smaller than you. You could look at Wall Street as a highly rational reptile because, what Wall Street will do is they'll try and look at what some of the bigger players can do to completely destroy a stock, buy it cheap, and then break up the company so that a few players make a lot of money. And you look at the game of making as much money as possible, whether you need it or not, and makes perfect sense to a reptile. When you understand that those are families being destroyed for your quick 200 million just so you could outmaneuver another reptile and play the game, to an empath, meaning to someone who's moved out of primarily operating as a lizard, that's not what you do. You don't make a quick buck by destroying a town if you can help it. But now we're in empathic territory, and that's not the framework of capitalism. So it's a decent reptilian system. It's a free market reptilian system, which is better than a non-free market reptilian system. Communism, where we're going to take and do this and that and the other, where it doesn't matter if this is your farm, we're seizing it. Doesn't matter if it's a closed system. It's a centralized control system, but also reptilian. You just look at the 40 million Russians starved to death and this under Stalin, and you realize it's reptilian, but it's centralized rather than free market control. The adolescent brings life and fire. The adolescent, in a healthy, non-shame-based system, sets fire to the corruption, to the weakness, to the asymmetry marked by their wound, meaning they've been fucked over by the corruption in the systems they've participated in the innocent state of a child. They've been victimized as a helpless child, and they're mad as hell. And that anger can set fire to the corruption, to the asymmetry, to the oversimplification, to the dysfunction, to the disease in the system. And the wise one, an archetype, the crone, the elder, the wise one celebrates the transformation, the rebirth of a more refined system with each generation, and delights in the power and passion of the rebel, of the critic, of the outcast. Now, this is also where you get the outcast and the criminal archetype, is when you're dealing with traumatized, regressed children in power structures. They don't welcome change. They're frightened of the unknown. And so anyone that diverges from the known gets cast out of the circle. When you cast someone out of the circle, you draw a line and you say, you're past the line, we don't want you. Now this is counter to evolution. The more people you cast out of your circle, for all the various, it's always shame and fear-based, the weaker your ecological framework is. But it's also a mathematical reality and evolutionary dictate that the rebels and the dishonored outcasts always have number one goal in mind: to destroy the system that cast them out. Now this is necessary because the mathematical synergies of the integrated complex ecology cannot function with these artificial cult lines. You know, it's the equivalent of trying to get one state to operate and cast the other states out of the United States. You know, we won't let the river flow in from, the Colorado, we won't let it flow in from this state into that state and out again, because we're compartmentalizing. So the ecology starts to break down. The reality is, if you did just stick a single state, your little identity, out in the middle of nowhere, an empty space, it would disappear in a matter of minutes. The water wouldn't come into it, so you'd run out of water. The weather would be unmoderated by the land masses around it. So everything functions as an ecology. So when you create these lines and banish into unconsciousness, into totalitarianism, that's an absolutely bad person or position that has no benefit whatsoever, and we just don't talk about them and they can't come anywhere near here. When you have that kind of totalitarian mindset, and it grows, paranoid leaders throw more and more possible threats to the status quo out into the rebel. The more they do this, the bigger the rebel faction grows. And the bigger the rebel faction grows, the more energy is spent undermining the system. And the system has to be undermined until it includes everyone in the circle. That's the most graceful circle there is an inclusive one. Inclusive of what? All of the diversity. Because if you trust nature, if there's an anomaly, it's not an accident. That anomaly is balancing something and teaching about an imbalance. And it's also paving the way for future evolution. At the very least, it's one of nature's bets. You and I are one of nature's bets. And where we deliver the highest yield back to nature is in being and developing our uniqueness. It's not being the same that's already there. Nature doesn't need that. Nature needs something more intelligent. And so, even if it's completely unconscious and randomized, nature's odds of having something more intelligent is if everyone becomes more and more unique. And then some of those uniquenesses will pioneer the way for a more intelligent future of the species. Of course, the ego doesn't want it to be anyone else. That's the attachment to that being us. So the adolescent has a lot to offer the rot and the decay of the imperfect system, and is a big part of evolution. But the adolescent in and of itself tends to be too extreme, just like the acceptance and docility of the child is too extreme. And so it's as you move then into the adult stage, you learn from the adolescent. And you learn from the adolescent how to care for the child. both in that person and in the next iteration of the group. Because the adolescent will tell you exactly how the system fucked up their inner child. And we do a great job of it. So that's one of the dynamics that's in play here. And so we're moving, in my case, from a more childlike acceptance and deification and parentification, etc., of high in the facilitators, to the extreme of these guys are going to kill me if I give them half the chance. And then what's the new iteration? What's the new blessing? And the breaks in that natural process are fear and shame. Fear of life, shame of mistakes, fear of change. That's what a shame-based cult produces. There are a couple of other distinctions that are useful to note. Traditionally, the family was a clan, and a powerful clan looked out for itself. Now, in looking out for itself, it's, I'll protect you in whatever you're doing, and I'll avenge you, and I'll do this and that and the other, and you'll do that for the clan. It's family. So this is clan-based loyalty. So-and-so is trying to throw out, is just trying to sue Uncle Harry for having another bar brawl. Did Uncle Harry have another bar brawl? Yes. Did he cause $30,000 in damage? Yes. Doesn't matter in clan thinking. He's part of the clan. We're all going to come up. You be an alibi for Uncle Harry there. I'll bribe the police. You this. No one hurts our clan. It's that simple. I'll look out for you. You look out for me. We're family. We're clan. Now, in this dynamic, the biggest and the most powerful clan dominates the smaller and less powerful clan, and particularly the individual. If you have an individual going up against a clan in clan consciousness, the individual is decimated because of the law of mass. The clan is effectively a 30-person bully or a 100-person bully against the one, and it doesn't matter that the one was wronged to begin with. All that matters is it's 1 against 100. And so this is the power of being part of a clan. And that's one relationship mode. You attack my clan, you attack me, it doesn't matter who you are, what you are, you're out. That does somewhat interrupt the evolutionary flow of the critic of the clan. And this is also the case in the clan, meaning it's often in the patriarch, dad doesn't get questioned. He does whatever he wants, and he'll cast you out of the family if you don't agree. Just listening to a biography of a young Jewish man who fell in love with a non-Jewish woman, and his father said, if you marry a non-Jewish woman, you're out of the clan. No will, no inheritance, I won't talk to you. You do what holds the clan identity, or you get cast out. And if you get to be free, but you don't get any support, and your statistical survival goes down. So there's a lot of pressure, particularly for the inner child, to stay in the clan. There's another way of relating to people and dynamics and tension, and it's the dynamic of who I like or am attracted to. I like you, I'm attracted to you, so you can abuse me, you can treat me like shit, you can be rude to my friends, and I'll defend you because I like you. And so, having decided I like you, anything you do is fine. I will defend you. I'm your husband, I'm your this. So again, that same type of dynamic, but it's about the individual. I like you, I don't like you, so whatever this person's doing, I'm going to be on that. And whatever that person's doing, they're bad, they're rotten, it's crap. We can see a lot of that in the political system. Because you're a Democrat, because you're a Republican, it doesn't really matter the merits of this and that and the other. We're going to clan up and see who's got the biggest clan. That's really what determines most of the bill passing these days, is we've all agreed that we're going to support our clan no matter what. The Democrats will vote with the Democrats, the Republicans will vote for the Republicans. So now we're two clans, and we have to try and get our clan to be bigger than your clan so that we can dominate within the political system. And that's, as far as it gets. So what goes on in larger power structures is a fractal representation of the consciousness at an individual level. So that being what leadership looks like in Washington, you can also presume that clan-like thinking is going on between your left and right hemisphere and in your family type units, because people in Washington don't just grow on trees, they get grown by the same parents and protocols and educational learnings that we all learned from. So it just happens on a big scale so that we can learn from that big scale. It's magnified, and so you can see all the dysfunction in Washington is a direct mirror of the dysfunction in the cult, which is a direct mirror of the dysfunction in our egos. And so, you just get a sense of what's likely going on in the semi-conscious regions, the corrupt regions of our own brain, and learn from our friends in Washington. Now, another distinction point, and this only happens when an individual is autonomous. Now, nature's goal is to produce unique, autonomous, intelligent energy masses, because that takes life forward. So an autonomous individual that is self-sustaining, that doesn't need to belong to the family or the group, has the freedom that a dependent entity does not have. If you depend on your family for survival, security, love and belonging, and self-esteem, for safety and security, and they'll cast you out for going against the clan, you cannot deviate. Secretly, you might say, I'm really sorry to hear this going on. I'm so sorry my dad's being such a jerk to you. But when it comes to the confrontation, I'm siding with dad or he'll throw me out, right? I'm siding with the high facilitators or they'll cast me out, right? That's where the one intern who was really useful, don't tell, because I don't want to be thrown out. Then you at some point in the synthesis process, you become self-sufficient, where you can survive and feel secure and meet your need for love and belonging and have a sense of self-esteem, meaning you're consistent with your own principles. Everyone has that, and they're unique. You have your own unique gifts. You're bringing them uniquely into the world with a sense of abundance. You become part of something bigger than yourself. When you can do that autonomously from your cult, from your family, from this circle or that circle, or even your country, you can find your own true north. Now here we get into principle-based influence. Because if you like someone and are attracted to them and you're using that system, then whatever they do, you're just going to go along with that. If you're in a place of the child of dependency, then whatever your group does, you go along with that. You defend the group. Because if that group falls, you don't have another place. But if you have moved, and the adolescent rejection of everything is a weak point in this cycle. Because if you really reject everything, You know, even the people that hate the monetary system, they still use a dollar and a credit card or something, or they go broke. So, if, you know, in that place of extreme rejection of the adolescent, there's a great vulnerability. Can the individual emerging energy patterns survive in that ecology? And that's where you come into the synthesis of the adult, using the best of the old system and innovating to the new system. Well, once you're autonomous, and you're now more vision and future and ideal based, then a unique form of alliance emerges that is not possible and doesn't happen in any of those earlier iterations. It's a vision-based, mathematical-based, principle-based, science-based decision that is not based on the person. And this involves the ability and willingness to differentiate between the person and the pattern of behavior. So you have this body, who I like, and this body, who I don't like. And those are two distinctions of people. And then you have this behavior that is very low on the intelligence continuum, and this behavior that is very high on the intelligence continuum. And this, if you are in the place where you are measuring protocols based on science, so you think of it as seatbelts, right? I don't like you, I do like you. That's my attraction distinction. But seatbelts kill the people I like and the people I don't like. They kill people. They're not intelligent, or the absence of seatbelts. And now you're pro-protocol or pro-policy, and you vote for let's have seatbelts, not based on whether the person you like or the party you like or the group that you like is voting for seatbelts. Not even of the dogma of your cult, but you just look at the science and say, well, the world I want to live in is closer to me if there are less deaths on the road, and there are significantly less deaths if there are seatbelts and airbags. So I'm voting for the policy. Now this requires intelligence, the intelligence to differentiate the policy from the person, and the intelligence to measure the effect of the policy relative to all the other policies. And this is the primary kind of angle of both concern and advocacy that I'm taking in this dynamic. Meaning, I don't care if I don't like the person who's being sexually abused by a therapist. What I care about is that incompetent therapists are highly leveraged, meaning an incompetent therapist can ruin a person's last hope in a matter of hours by making a few mistakes. Now, because that is so leveraged, it's very important on the intelligence continuum, meaning the lower points in intelligence are when people's entire life is fucked up in a matter of hours. And the highest points of intelligence are when someone's life is revolutionary opened up in a matter of hours. And here also, you don't, if you're dealing with the I like the person, I don't like the person filter, you take the person in aggregate. Meaning, I don't agree that driving drunk is a good idea, and I don't like the fact that this person I like has killed 3 or 4 people driving drunk and still managed to survive, and he ran off and he's still doing it. But I still accept the person as a whole, meaning it's just, you have to pick your average, so to speak. The most complex, the thing that requires the most science, is differentiating the person from each of the behaviors and paying very close attention to high leverage things, where a very small amount of time and energy would have an enormous impact over time. An example of a good thing would be, I'm for the idea of 12-year-olds learning entrepreneurship, through their teens and putting $10,000, into a long-term investment of some kind that is going to lead to more innovative and independent thinking and less drudgery and less Americans hating their jobs, because you have you've got a higher likelihood of financial independence. That's a protocol. And so when you focus on the protocol, sometimes you stand with the people you like, sometimes you stand with your family, sometimes you stand with the norms, sometimes you stand against the norms, sometimes you stand with your country, sometimes you stand with outside of the country. If you look at the data that says Abu Ghraib is an act of terror, meaning people are terrified when they are tortured. And if you look at the million of innocent Iraqis that are dead because we felt like bullying another country based on what we knew to be very weak, if not outright faulty intelligence. In other words, we became the weapon of mass destruction. 1 million people is pretty mass. So you don't go looking for weapons of mass destruction by becoming a weapon of mass destruction. And you don't fight a war on a feeling by inciting terror around the world with drone bombings and the like. That's a protocol. You look at the fact that there are more terrorists, meaning people trying to fight the United States, than there were in 2001. And you realize a big part of it is that giving millions of people PTSD in their own homeland does not generate goodwill. So there are, in fact, more terrorists, quote unquote. I mean, we're the biggest one, but there are more terrorists because we're inciting more terror in Afghanistan, Iraq, etc., than even the Taliban. 1 million people is nothing to sneeze about. But regardless of where the side, it's not a default on country. It's a focus on policy. I don't want innocent people killed. So I'm against the Iraq war. I'd be against it if Russia did it. I'd be against it if my dad did it. I'd be against it if I did it. I'd be against it if Iran did it. Because the policy, the result, is not taking me where I want to go. But only someone in an independent position who can withstand the volatility, the trauma, the fear of being retaliated against by their clan, by their partner, by their family, by their country, can take this policy-based thing independent of who's proposing the policy. Now, anyone who is in the empathic region of their brain rather than the reptilian and the reptilian rational, if they're in the empathic rational, it's very, very clear what the science is around every one of the positions that I'm bringing up and advocating here. It's a position and protocol and best practice challenge. Now, obviously, there are personal feelings around the individuals who terrified me, traumatized me, led to PTSD, and escalated to 500% more pain than I've ever experienced in my adult life. That was the moment when the entire facilitator body closed ranks, this is clan, and they met with my sexual abuser, Peter Sandhill, and I was the only one not invited to the meeting. And that's how my body knew I was not part of the clan. We will protect a sexually abusing high facilitator at the expense of our patient, of our client, of our community member, because he's more in our clan than they are. Now, that has a ripple effect, meaning if everyone understands that this is the attitude, this was Sarah's attitude, I was one of Sarah's one-on-one clients. And so the ethics are saying it's focus on the policy. If your husband is sexually abusing a client repeatedly, it's all the more important to fight for the client, because fighting for the client decreases the harm done to the client. Meaning I wouldn't have gotten PTSD without the clan thinking of the high facilitator body. Because at my worst pain, I wouldn't have gotten the message, your needs come last, our needs come first. Which when I was in a dependent relationship at that time, and you need to have the trust to have a dependent relationship, to go into the childlike state. See, this is why it's so sacred. So what I'm focusing on are ultimately protocols. Now, there are feelings involved, and there are, my reptilian brain is certainly engaged to the degree that I am treated sociopathically, because that's what the reptilian brain responds to. You know, when I write to 500 high participants and say, please help me, and no one says, how can I help? That's again a big broadcast. You're out of the circle. So it's been a journey of 5 or 6 years to differentiate myself from high, where it doesn't matter that much what happens around high for my well-being. But for life and evolution to take place, if you've gone through a system and have gone through the completeness of the rejection, the critic, and the rebellion of the adolescent as part of differentiating from that system and come back to a new vision, the responsibility is to go forward. I mean, regardless of what high does, whether they shut down or adopt or grow or anything like that. But these positions are data-based. And I'll talk with anyone who wants to discuss data. But you cannot help your meme, your organization, or yourselves or your group evolve if it's us against them, if it's clan thinking. I like Peter Sandhill. I like Peter Sandhill more than a lot of people, who are more ethical than Peter Sandhill, who know their job more than Peter Sandhill. That's not the point. The more you like Peter Sandhill, the least you want, the less you want him destroying his own life through his own ignorance, his own shame, his own incompetence. So the more you want the positions. See, because these positions, when you fight the science and you fight the data, the positions are what is destroying high. It's nothing innate in the facilitators, but shame and fear in the facilitator body will lead to reactive defense in the face of all intelligent positions. Because if I made a dreadful mistake, and they did, many, then I am a mistake. And in a sociopathic paradigm, I must punish myself. Peter did a lot of that. Peter's still punishing himself until you can become an adult. And that's how can I help? If you want to know who the adults are, how can I help? When you hear that, and it's with substance and integrity there, you're dealing with an adult, someone in service to the dynamic and the system. So I hope that gives you a little bit of awareness as you decide what your place needs to be. And a majority have and will defend the clan or defend the people they like, and it's just, it takes time and thought and, in my case, 1,000 hours of psychological research of the statistics. I'm against sex with a therapist in a way that I wasn't. I was quite open to it, obviously in my session with Peter, because I was ignorant. But in every single case, the data says this is terrible for the client. And so if you want therapy to evolve as a possibility that people trust and go to, then you have to differentiate the therapists from the positions that harm their clients. Or you will not have a world that evolves when people spend money to go to therapists, or people will just not go to therapists, which will slow down evolution. Thanks for watching.